Human females use that to reproduce? Can I try it? The question, blurted out by Tellarite General Boron, echoed through the pristine spaceport, leaving human diplomat Frank Cook momentarily stunned. Frank had just stepped off his spacecraft onto the Tellarite homeworld, carrying Earth's last hope for averting interstellar war. The gleaming metal structures and advanced technology surrounding him stood in stark contrast to the bizarrely personal nature of the alien general's inquiry. Boron, a towering figure with mottled gray skin and multiple eye stalks, loomed over Frank. The human diplomat cleared his throat, desperately searching for a diplomatic response. "General Boron, perhaps we should focus on the peace negotiations." "Nonsense," Boron interrupted, his eye stalks swiveling with excitement. "We've been observing your Earth transmissions. Your mating rituals fascinate us. Tell me, how does your reproductive organ function?" Frank's mind raced. He'd prepared extensively for these crucial negotiations, but nothing had prepared him for this. The fate of Earth hung in the balance, threatened by a technologically superior species obsessed with human genitalia. As they walked towards the negotiation chambers, Boron continued his barrage of questions. "Your courtship practices, the act of sexual intercourse, it's all so foreign to us. Our species reproduces through cloning, you see." Frank listened intently, realizing the stakes were even higher than he'd initially thought. The Tellarites' interest in humanity wasn't mere curiosity, it was desperation. Boron's voice took on a grave tone. "Our population is declining, Frank. Genetic stagnation plagues us. We believe human sexual reproduction could be the key to saving our species." The implications hit Frank like a meteor strike. Earth's survival and the future of the Tellarite race both hinged on his ability to navigate this uncomfortable situation. They entered the negotiation chamber, where a panel of Tellarite scientists and military leaders waited. All eyes and eye stalks turned to Frank, filled with eager anticipation. "Esteemed colleagues," Boron announced, "the human diplomat has arrived. Now we can finally unravel the mysteries of their reproductive practices." Frank took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He'd arrived expecting to discuss trade agreements and military de-escalation. Instead, he found himself an impromptu ambassador for human sexuality and biology. As the first round of talks began, it became clear that the Tellarites' obsession with human reproduction would be the central issue of the negotiations. Frank's mind raced, trying to find a way to satisfy their curiosity while protecting Earth's interest and maintaining diplomatic decorum. The future of two species now rested on Frank's ability to explain the birds and the bees to a room full of alien officials. As he opened his mouth to speak, he silently cursed his diplomatic training for never covering this particular scenario. Frank took a deep breath, his palms sweating as he faced the panel of eager Tellarite officials. Their eye stalks swiveled in unison, fixated on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "Well, human reproduction is a complex biological process," he began, his voice steady despite his discomfort. "It involves the fusion of genetic material from two individuals of opposite sexes." General Boron leaned forward, his multiple eyes blinking rapidly. "Fascinating! And how exactly does this fusion occur?" Frank cleared his throat. "Through a physical act called sexual intercourse. It's, rather private and intimate for humans." The room erupted with excited chittering as the Tellarites conferred among themselves. A scientist with pale blue skin raised a appendage. "What about the mechanics of your reproductive organs? How do they function?" Sweat beaded on Frank's forehead as he fumbled for an appropriate response. "They're, well, complementary in design. The male organ enters the female organ and genetic material is transferred." The Tellarites' excitement grew palpable. Questions flew at Frank from all directions, each more personal than the last. He fielded them as best he could, providing general information while trying to steer the conversation towards diplomatic matters. "While human reproduction is certainly interesting," Frank interjected, "perhaps we should discuss the terms of our potential alliance." General Boron waved a dismissive tentacle. "All in good time, human. This information is crucial to our understanding of your species." After what felt like hours of awkward explanations and increasingly invasive queries, a recess was called. Frank retreated to a private chamber, his head spinning. He activated his secure communicator, contacting Earth's command center. Admiral Johnson's holographic image flickered to life. "Report, Cook. How are the negotiations progressing?" Frank ran a hand through his hair. "Sir, it's complicated. The Tellarites seem obsessed with human reproduction. I've spent the entire session explaining basic biology." The Admiral's expression darkened. "Listen carefully, Cook. We've received intelligence that the situation is far worse than we thought. The Tellarites have been developing advanced cloning technology. If these talks fail, they plan to forcibly harvest human genetic material." Frank's blood ran cold. "My God, what are my orders, sir?" "Continue engaging them on the topic of reproduction. Keep them distracted. We're assembling a covert team to investigate their cloning facilities. Stay alert and gather any intel you can." The communication ended, leaving Frank with a newfound weight on his shoulders. He squared his jaw, steeling himself for what lay ahead. Returning to the negotiation chamber, Frank was introduced to a new face. Dr. Zara, a female Tellarite geneticist, regarded him with unmistakable curiosity. "Diplomat Cook," she said, her voice smoother than her male counterparts. "I've been studying human biology extensively. Perhaps we could discuss your mating rituals in more detail. Privately." General Boren's eye stalks quivered with excitement. "An excellent suggestion. Go with Dr. Zara, human. We eagerly await your report." Frank nodded, recognizing both the danger and opportunity this presented. As he followed Dr. Zara through the complex, he noted increased security measures and restricted areas. Activating his hidden communication device, he sent a coded message to Earth's covert team, alerting them to his movements and potential locations of interest. Dr. Zara's laboratory was a sterile, high-tech environment dominated by holographic displays. Frank's eyes widened as he recognized detailed scans of human anatomy floating in the air. "Impressive technology," he commented, trying to mask his unease. Dr. Zara manipulated the displays with her tentacles. "We've learned much about your species, Diplomat Cook. Your genetic diversity is remarkable." Frank's mind raced, connecting the dots. "You've been studying humans up close, haven't you? How many have you abducted?" The Tellarite scientist paused, her eye stalks drooping slightly. "It was necessary for our research. You must understand our entire species is at risk. Genetic stagnation threatens our very existence." Frank leaned against a nearby console, his expression carefully neutral. "Tell me about your cloning process, Dr. Zara. How has it failed to solve your problem?" As Dr. Zara launched into a technical explanation, Frank listened intently, gathering valuable intelligence. The Tellarites' situation was dire. Their population faced collapse within a few generations due to accumulated genetic defects. "A combination of human genetic material and our technology could create a hybrid species," Dr. Zara explained, her voice tinged with hope. "It could save both our races." Frank noticed a shift in Dr. Zara's demeanor as their conversation progressed. Her eye stalks focused on him with increasing intensity, and she moved closer, almost unconsciously. "Your physical form is so different from ours," she mused, reaching out as if to touch him before stopping herself. "The concept of natural reproduction is intriguing." Frank's diplomatic instincts kicked in, recognizing a potential advantage. He was about to respond when a piercing alarm shattered the moment. Red lights flashed throughout the lab as a booming voice echoed through hidden speakers. "Security breach! All personnel to alert stations!" The laboratory door burst open, revealing a furious General Boren flanked by armed guards. "Treachery!" he bellowed, eye stalks whipping about in agitation. "Your Earth forces have infiltrated our facility." Frank's mind raced. The covert team must have been discovered. He glanced at Dr. Zara, seeing confusion and hurt in her alien features. "Diplomat Cook," General Boren growled, "you are under arrest for espionage against the Tellarite Confederation." Guards advanced, weapon tentacles raised. Frank backed away, hands raised placatingly. "General, please, there's been a misunderstanding." Dr. Zara moved between Frank and the guards, her voice sharp. "Wait! We need him alive and unharmed for our research." Frank's back pressed against a console, options dwindling. The fate of human-Tellarite relations and potentially an interstellar war, hung on his next move. As tensions in the room reached a boiling point, Frank's hand brushed against an unfamiliar device on the console behind him. Frank's fingers closed around the unfamiliar device on the console. Without hesitation, he grabbed Dr. Zara's arm and pulled her towards him, positioning her between himself and the advancing guards. "Wait!" Frank shouted, his voice cutting through the blaring alarm. "Dr. Zara, listen to me. Earth's intentions are peaceful. Our team was only gathering information to protect humanity from forced cloning. We want to help, not harm." Dr. Zara's eye stalks swiveled rapidly, her gaze darting between Frank and General Bourne. The conflict within her was palpable, her tentacles twisting in agitation. You lied to us?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No," Frank insisted, maintaining his grip on her arm. "We came here to negotiate peace, but we needed to understand the full scope of the situation. Your genetic crisis, your cloning technology, it all factors into finding a solution that benefits both our species." General Bourne's eye stalks quivered with rage. "Enough of this deception! Guards, seize them both!" Dr. Zara made her decision in that moment. She stepped closer to Frank, shielding him from the guard's weapon tentacles. "No, General, we must hear him out. This may be our only chance to save our people." "Traitor!" Bourne bellowed, his massive form shaking with fury. "You side with this alien infiltrator over your own kind?" Frank's military training kicked in as he assessed their dire situation. His eyes darted around the lab, searching for an escape route. They landed on a nearby control panel, its surface covered in pulsing lights and alien symbols. "Dr. Zara," he whispered urgently, "that panel, does it control the lab's security systems?" She nodded almost imperceptibly, her eyes wide with understanding. In one fluid motion, Frank released Dr. Zara and launched himself towards the panel. His foot connected with a satisfying crunch, smashing through the delicate circuitry. Sparks flew as the lab's doors slammed shut, sealing General Bourne and his guards inside. "Run!" Frank shouted, grabbing Dr. Zara's hand and pulling her towards the exit. They burst into the corridor, alarms blaring and red lights flashing all around them. The complex was in chaos, with Tellarite personnel rushing in all directions. Frank tapped his hidden communicator. "Commander Chen, this is Cook. We're on the move. What's your status?" Sarah Chen's voice crackled through the device. "We've secured the data on their cloning program, but we're pinned down in Sector 7. Heavy resistance." "Understood," Frank replied, his mind racing. "Dr. Zara, what's the quickest route to Sector 7? The Tellarite geneticist blinked rapidly, processing the question. "Take the next left, then 2 rights. It'll lead you to a maintenance shaft that connects directly to Sector 7. As they ran, Frank relayed the information to Commander Chen. They rounded a corner and came face to face with a group of startled Tellarite scientists, their arms full of data crystals and research materials. Frank's diplomatic instincts kicked in. He turned to Dr. Zara, his expression urgent. "Tell them there's been a security breach in this sector. Order an immediate evacuation." Dr. Zara hesitated for a split second before straightening her posture and addressing her colleagues. "Attention! Security breach in this sector. All personnel must evacuate immediately. Leave all materials behind for decontamination." The scientists exchanged confused looks but quickly complied, dropping their precious cargo and hurrying away. Frank swiftly gathered the abandoned data crystals, stuffing them into his pockets. They continued their frantic journey through the twisting corridors of the Tellarite complex. Frank's communicator crackled to life once more. "Cook, we fought our way to the extraction point," Commander Chen reported. "Small hangar, emergency escape pods. What's your ETA?" 5 minutes, Frank replied, glancing at Dr. Zara for confirmation. She nodded, her eye stalks swiveling to scan for threats. As they approached the hangar, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed behind them. Frank risked a glance over his shoulder to see General Bourne leading a contingent of heavily armed security forces. "Faster!" Frank urged, pulling Dr. Zara along. They burst into the hangar just as Commander Chen and her team were preparing an escape pod for launch. The Earth operatives whirled around, weapons raised, but lowered them upon recognizing Frank. "Get in!" Chen shouted, motioning towards the open hatch. Before they could board, General Boron's booming voice filled the hangar. "Halt, intruders!" Frank turned to face the enraged Tellarite leader, positioning himself protectively in front of Dr. Zara. Boron's eye stalks quivered with impossibly strong fury as he surveyed the scene. "You have two choices, human," Boron growled. "Return Dr. Zara and all stolen data, or face immediate attack. Choose wisely." Frank's mind raced, knowing that his next words could determine the fate of both species. He took a deep breath, calling upon years of diplomatic training. "General Boron," Frank began, his voice calm and measured, "I propose an alternative, a joint human Tellarite research initiative to address your genetic stagnation crisis." Boron's eye stalks twitched in surprise. "Explain yourself quickly." "Earth's genetic diversity combined with your advanced cloning technology could be the key to ensuring the survival of both our species," Frank continued. "We could work together, ethically and cooperatively, to solve this crisis without resorting to conflict." Dr. Zara stepped forward, her voice filled with newfound conviction. "He's right, General. My interactions with Frank have shown me the value of natural genetic variation. An alliance could benefit us both immeasurably." Boron's multiple eyes narrowed, suspicion warring with curiosity. "And why should we trust you after this infiltration?" Before Frank could respond, a holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the hangar. Admiral Johnson's stern visage towered over them all. "General Boron," the Admiral's voice boomed, "I am Admiral Johnson of Earth's Diplomatic Corps. We've been monitoring the situation closely. I can confirm that Diplomat Cook speaks with the full authority of Earth's government." The Admiral's gaze swept across the hangar. "We are prepared to enter into formal negotiations for a joint research program, effective immediately. In exchange, we require the cessation of all unauthorized human cloning activities. This is an opportunity for both our species to move forward in peace and mutual understanding." A tense silence fell over the hangar as General Boron considered the proposal. Frank held his breath, acutely aware of the weapons trained on him and his team. Finally, Boron's eye stalks drooped slightly in acquiescence. "Very well. A temporary ceasefire is granted. You may depart with the understanding that you will return for official diplomatic talks." As Frank and Dr. Zara boarded the escape pod with Commander Chen's team, he caught a glimpse of something new in General Boron's alien eyes, a grudging respect. The pod's hatch sealed with a hiss, and Frank felt the familiar lurch of acceleration as they launched into space. As the Tellarite complex receded behind them, he turned to Dr. Zara, who was staring out the viewport with a mix of wonder and apprehension. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She turned to him, her eye stalks focusing intently on his face. "I believe I am, Frank, but I fear the real challenges are only just beginning." Frank nodded, his mind already racing with the complexities of the task ahead. As they approached the human diplomatic vessel in orbit, he knew that this crisis had opened up new possibilities and new dangers in the delicate dance of interstellar relations. As the human diplomatic vessel approached its docking bay, Frank felt the familiar shudder of the ship's engines powering down. He glanced at Dr. Zara, noting the mixture of excitement and apprehension in her alien features. The Tellarite geneticist's eye stalks swiveled rapidly, taking in every detail of the human ship. "Welcome aboard," Frank said softly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. The airlock hissed open, revealing Admiral Johnson waiting on the other side. The Admiral's stern expression softened slightly as he took in the ragtag group of humans and their Tellarite guest. "Diplomat Cook, Commander Chen," he nodded curtly. "I trust your mission was eventful." Frank stepped forward, offering a crisp salute. "Admiral, may I present Dr. Zara, Chief Geneticist of the Tellarite Confederation. She's agreed to assist us in understanding their cloning technology and genetic crisis." Admiral Johnson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Indeed. Well, Doctor, we appreciate your cooperation. I hope you'll find our accommodations satisfactory." Dr. Zara's tentacles twisted in what Frank had come to recognize as a gesture of nervous energy. "Thank you, Admiral. I look forward to working with your science team." As they made their way through the ship's corridors, Admiral Johnson briefed Frank on the latest developments. Earth's government has agreed to preliminary talks about a joint research initiative. It's a delicate situation, Cook. We're walking a tightrope here. Frank nodded, his mind already racing with the implications. Understood, sir. What's our next move? The Admiral led them into a secure conference room, its walls lined with holographic displays showing star charts and diplomatic communiques. You'll be leading the negotiations, Cook. We need to understand the full extent of the Tellarite genetic crisis and find a way to leverage our own genetic diversity without compromising Earth's security. Over the next several days, Frank immersed himself in the data retrieved from the Tellarite facility. He pored over genetic sequences and cloning protocols, often seeking Dr. Zara's expertise to decipher the more complex aspects of Tellarite biology. During one late-night session, Frank found himself marveling at Dr. Zara's dedication. She had been working tirelessly alongside the human science team, her enthusiasm for the collaborative effort evident in every gesture. You seem to be adapting well to life aboard a human vessel, Frank observed, offering her a cup of a steaming beverage that the ship's synthesizers had approximated as a Tellarite stimulant. Dr. Zara's eye stalks curved in what Frank had learned was a smile. It's fascinating, Frank. The genetic diversity among your crew is astounding. In just a few days, I've observed more natural variation than I've seen in my entire career on Tellus. Frank nodded, taking a sip of his own coffee. It's something we often take for granted, but seeing it through your eyes, it really drives home what's at stake here. As they worked, Frank found himself increasingly drawn to Dr. Zara. Her brilliance, her dedication to her people, and her willingness to challenge her own preconceptions were captivating. He caught himself wondering what it would be like to... His thoughts were interrupted by a priority alert from the bridge. Admiral Johnson's voice crackled over the intercom. Cook Chen, report to the command center immediately. Moments later, they stood before a large holographic display showing the Tellarite homeworld. Admiral Johnson's face was grim as he gestured to angry red indicators flashing across the planet's surface. We've received intelligence that a faction of Tellarite military leaders, led by a Commander Grix, is pushing for immediate action against Earth, the Admiral explained. General Boron is trying to hold them back, but his position is precarious. Commander Chen leaned in, studying the tactical readouts. Sir, these energy signatures, they're consistent with fleet mobilization. If Grix gets his way, we could be looking at an attack on our colonies within days. Frank's mind raced, weighing options and potential outcomes. Suddenly, an idea crystallized. Admiral, what if we arranged a secret meeting? Myself, Dr. Zara, and General Boron. Neutral ground, say, that moon orbiting the gas giant in the outer system? Admiral Johnson's eyes narrowed. Risky, Cook, very risky. But if we could hammer out a preliminary agreement, demonstrate the benefits of cooperation, it could undermine Grix's position, Frank finished. Give Boron the leverage he needs to maintain control. The Admiral nodded slowly. All right, Cook, make it happen, but you're not going in alone. Commander Chen, assemble a small security team. Keep it covert, but be prepared for anything. As they left the command center to prepare for the mission, Dr. Zara pulled Frank aside. Her eye stalks quivered with an intensity he hadn't seen before. Frank, I have a proposal, she said, her voice low. One that could provide irrefutable proof of human Tellarite compatibility. Frank raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Dr. Zara's tentacles twisted nervously. What if we were to attempt conception of a hybrid child, through natural means? Frank blinked, momentarily stunned. The implications of such an act, both personal and political, were staggering. He opened his mouth to respond, but was cut off by another priority alert. Commander Chen's voice came through their comm devices. Cook, Zara, we've got a problem. Energy readings from the Tellarite homeworld just spiked. Analysis suggests they're prepping to launch a massive fleet. Frank locked eyes with Dr. Zara, seeing his own mix of perseverance and fear reflected in her alien gaze. We'll continue this discussion later, he said softly. Right now, we've got a war to prevent. Minutes later, Frank found himself strapped into a shuttle alongside Dr. Zara, Commander Chen, and a small security team. As they began their descent towards the neutral moon, Frank's mind whirled with diplomatic strategies, contingency plans, and the weight of Dr. Zara's proposal. The shuttle's sensors pinged, alerting them to multiple Tellarite ships entering the moon's atmosphere. Commander Chen's hand went to her weapon. Looks like our secret meeting might not be so secret after all. As the shuttle touched down on the moon's rocky surface, Frank took a deep breath. The next few hours would determine the fate of two species. He glanced at Dr. Zara, drawing strength from her presence. "Ready?" he asked. Dr. Zara's eye stalks curved in that now familiar smile. "Ready?" Together they stepped out onto the alien landscape, prepared to face whatever challenges awaited them in the tense negotiations ahead. As Frank and his team stepped onto the moon's rocky surface, the eerie silence was shattered by the whine of approaching engines. Commander Chen's hand flew to her weapon as multiple Tellarite ships descended through the thin atmosphere, kicking up clouds of dust. "Those aren't just Boron's ships," Chen muttered, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the newcomers. "We've got company." Frank nodded grimly. "Looks like our secret meeting just became a lot more complicated." The shuttles touched down, forming a rough triangle with the human vessel at its apex. Frank watched as two distinct groups of Tellarites emerged, one led by the familiar figure of General Boron, the other by a tall, imposing Tellarite with viridian eye stalks. "Commander Grix, I presume," Frank said under his breath. Dr. Zara's tentacles twisted anxiously. "This is bad, Frank. Very bad." Before Frank could respond, General Boron approached at a hurried pace, his eye stalks swiveling wildly. "Diplomat Cook," he wheezed. "I come seeking asylum. Grix attempted a coup. I barely escaped with my life." Frank's mind raced, weighing the potential consequences of his next move. He glanced at Commander Chen, who gave a slight nod. "Very well, General," Frank said, keeping his voice steady. "We'll grant you temporary protection. But I need to know everything about Grix's plans." As Boron began to speak, a high-pitched whine filled the air. Frank looked up to see Grix's ships powering up their weapon systems. "Take cover!" he shouted, diving behind a nearby boulder. The moon's surface erupted in chaos as energy blasts rained down on both Boron's loyalists and the human position. Frank pressed his back against the rock, feeling the heat of near misses searing past. "Chen," he called out, "we need a defensive strategy. Use the terrain to our advantage." Commander Chen was already in motion, directing the security team to key positions among the moon's craggy landscape. "Dr. Zara," she barked, "any insights on their tech that could give us an edge?" The Tellarite scientist's eye stalks perked up. "Yes, their targeting systems. I can hack them. I just need access to one of their downed shuttles." Frank nodded. "Do it. Chen, provide cover." As Dr. Zara worked feverishly on the captured Tellarite technology, Frank coordinated with Boron's forces, creating a unified front against Grix's assault. The battle raged across the lunar landscape, energy weapons scorching the rocky terrain. Suddenly, a lone figure broke away from Grix's lines, running full tilt towards the human position with arms raised. "Hold your fire," Frank ordered, recognizing the universal gesture of surrender. The Tellarite scientist skidded to a halt before them, panting heavily. "I am Dr. Krell," he gasped. "I defect. Grix, he has a bioweapon, designed to target human DNA." Frank felt a chill run down his spine. "Explain, quickly." Dr. Krell's eye stalks drooped in shame. "It's meant to sterilize Earth's population. Grix plans to solve our reproduction crisis through forced hybridization." "By the stars," Dr. Zara whispered, her tentacles coiling in horror. Frank activated his comlink. "Admiral Johnson, this is Cook. We have a critical situation. Grix has developed a bioweapon targeted at humans. He's mobilizing to attack our colonies." The Admiral's voice crackled back, tense with concern. "Understood, Cook. We're dispatching the fleet to intercept, but we may not make it in time to protect the outlying settlements." As Frank absorbed this grim news, an idea began to form. He turned to Dr. Zara and Dr. Krell. "We need a non-lethal countermeasure, a virus that could incapacitate Grix's forces without causing permanent harm. Can you do it?" The two scientists exchanged glances, their eye stalks twisting in concentration. "Possibly," Dr. Zara said slowly, "but we'll need time and resources." You'll have them, Frank assured her. Chen, we need to buy them that time. Let's push Grix's forces back. As the battle intensified, Frank coordinated the combined human and Tellarite loyalist defenses. Dr. Zara and Dr. Krell worked tirelessly in the shuttle, using their combined knowledge of Tellarite physiology to engineer a targeted virus. Hours passed in a blur of strategy, explosions, and tense waiting. Finally, Dr. Zara emerged from the shuttle, her eye stalks drooping with exhaustion but gleaming with triumph. "It's ready," she announced. Frank nodded, relief washing over him. But as he surveyed the battlefield, he realized the virus's deployment posed a new challenge. Grix's forces were too spread out, and they had no way to disperse the virus effectively. A plan audacious and dangerous crystallized in Frank's mind. "I'm going to offer myself as a hostage," he declared, drawing shocked looks from his team. "It's the only way to get close enough to their command ship to release the virus." Before anyone could object, Frank stepped out from cover, his hands raised. "Commander Grix," he shouted, "I propose a parley." Moments later, Frank found himself aboard Grix's command ship, face to face with the Tellarite leader. Grix's viridian eye stalks focused on Frank with predatory intensity. "So the human diplomat offers himself," Grix rumbled. "How noble, and how foolish." Frank met Grix's gaze steadily. "I came to understand, Commander. Why resort to such drastic measures? Surely there must be a peaceful solution to your crisis." Grix laughed, a harsh grating sound. "Peace? Peace is stagnation, human. Only through conflict, through domination, can we overcome our biological limitations. Your species is both our greatest threat and our salvation." As Grix expounded on his twisted philosophy, Frank's mind raced. He needed to keep the commander talking, to buy time for Dr. Zara and Commander Chen to disperse the virus. Back on the moon's surface, Chen oversaw the preparation of the captured Tellarite shuttles. "Doctor," she called to Zara, "we're ready to launch, but Frank's still on that ship. If we release the virus now—" Dr. Zara's tentacles twisted in anguish. "We have no choice. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few." Frank knew the risks. As Chen gave the order to launch, a new fleet of ships dropped out of hyperspace. Admiral Johnson's voice boomed across all frequencies. "This is Admiral Johnson of the Earth Defense Fleet. Commander Grix, power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded." The stage was set for a cosmic standoff. Frank trapped aboard an enemy vessel, a bioweapon poised to devastate humanity, and a non-lethal virus racing towards Grix's fleet. The fate of two species hung in the balance, with the next few moments promising to reshape the future of human-Tellarite relations and the balance of power in the galaxy. Frank held Grix's gaze, his mind racing to find a way to keep the Tellarite commander talking. He needed to buy time for his team, and perhaps, just perhaps, find a way to avert this catastrophe. "Before you make any irreversible decisions, Commander," Frank said, his voice steady despite the tension thrumming through his body, "I'd like to understand more about your people. What led you to this point?" Grix's eye stalks twitched, a mix of surprise and suspicion evident in their movement. "You stand on the brink of annihilation, and you wish for a history lesson?" Frank spread his hands, a gesture of openness. "Knowledge is power, Commander. If we're to tenacity this conflict, we need to understand its roots." For a moment, Grix remained silent, his alien features unreadable. Then, to Frank's relief, he began to speak. "Our genetic crisis began 3 generations ago," Grix rumbled, his voice tinged with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "Our birth rates plummeted. Those who were born often carried debilitating mutations. We've tried everything: genetic engineering, cloning, even experimenting with hybridization, using DNA from other species. Nothing has worked." As Grix spoke, Frank listened intently, his diplomatic training allowing him to pick up on the nuances in the Tellarite's tone and body language. He sensed desperation, fear, and a deep-seated need to ensure the survival of his species. Meanwhile, in the captured Tellarite shuttle, Dr. Zar and Dr. Krell worked feverishly, their tentacles and eye stalks intertwining as they made final adjustments to the non-lethal virus. "The protein code is stable," Dr. Krell announced, his eye stalks quivering with excitement. It should spread rapidly through their ventilation systems without degrading. Dr. Zara's tentacles danced over the control panel, inputting the final sequence. Initiating synthesis now. Commander Chen will be ready for dispersal in 5 minutes. Chen's voice crackled over the comm. Understood. Teams are in position. We'll begin the operation on your mark. Back on Grix's command ship, Frank pressed further. Your people have achieved incredible technological advancements. Surely there must be a solution that doesn't involve conflict with other species. Grix's eye stalks drooped slightly. We've explored every avenue, diplomat. Our scientists have worked tirelessly, but time is running out. Without drastic action, the Tellarite people will cease to exist within a few generations. Frank leaned in, his voice low and intense. What if I told you there might be another way, a path that doesn't require violence or subjugation? Before Grix could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. The commander's eye stalks swiveled wildly as reports flooded in from every deck. What's happening? Grix roared, turning to his officers. Unknown contagion spreading through the fleet, one of them reported, panic evident in his voice. Crews are experiencing disorientation and weakness. We're losing combat effectiveness. Frank fought to keep his expression neutral, but inwardly, he allowed himself a moment of relief. The virus was working. Grix's eye stalks focused on Frank with laser intensity. You, he snarled. This is your doing. In one fluid motion, Grix grabbed Frank, using him as a shield as he backed towards the command console. All ships, prepare for immediate withdrawal, he barked into the comm. Use the human as leverage if necessary. But it was too late. Admiral Johnson's voice boomed across all frequencies. Commander Grix, your fleet is surrounded and your forces are incapacitated. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Grix's grip on Frank tightened as the sound of boarding shuttles echoed through the hull. This isn't over, human, he hissed. Frank met the Tellarite's gaze steadily. You're right, Commander. It isn't over, but it doesn't have to end in destruction for either of our peoples. The ship shuddered as the boarding teams breached the hull. Commander Chen's voice rang out, clear and authoritative. Security teams, fan out. Locate and secure Commander Grix. Rescue teams, find Diplomat Cook. In the chaos that followed, Frank saw his opportunity. He drove his elbow into Grix's midsection, a risky move given Tellarite physiology, but one that caught the commander off guard. Frank broke free, sprinting towards the command center. He burst through the doors, finding himself face to face with Grix and his remaining loyal officers. The Tellarite leader's eye stalks were wild with fury and desperation. It's over, Commander, Frank said, his voice firm but not unkind. But this doesn't have to be the end for your people. Cooperation with humans offers a real chance for Tellarite survival, a better chance than conflict ever could. Grix's eye stalks wavered, confusion replacing anger. What are you proposing, human? Before Frank could answer, the doors hissed open again. Dr. Zara entered, flanked by a team of human and Tellarite scientists. Her tentacles waved excitedly as she approached. Frank, Commander Grix, she said, her translator struggling to keep up with her rapid speech. We've made a breakthrough. Preliminary results show significant potential for human Tellarite genetic compatibility. With further research, we might be able to solve the Tellarite crisis without resorting to cloning or forced hybridization. Grix's eye stalks drooped, then slowly rose again, focusing on Dr. Zara with newfound interest. Is this true? Can you verify these results? As Dr. Zara launched into a detailed explanation, Frank's comm unit crackled to life. General Boren's voice came through, tinged with excitement. Diplomat Cook, I've made contact with the Tellarite homeworld. They've agreed to enter formal negotiations with Earth. The government sees this as an opportunity to end our genetic crisis peacefully. Frank allowed himself a small smile. The immediate danger had passed, but he knew the real work was just beginning. As he watched Dr. Zara and the Tellarite scientists engaged in animated discussion, he realized that this crisis had opened the door to a new era of interstellar cooperation. The sound of approaching footsteps drew Frank's attention. Commander Chen entered the command center, her expression a mixture of relief and wariness. Diplomat Cook, she said, nodding respectfully. The ship is secure. Admiral Johnson reports that Grix's fleet has been neutralized without casualties. He's requesting your presence on his flagship. Apparently, Earth has dispatched a senior diplomat to oversee the formal negotiations. Frank nodded, his mind already racing with the implications. As he prepared to leave the Tellarite ship, he knew that the events of the past few hours had irrevocably changed the course of human-Tellarite relations. The challenges ahead were immense, but for the first time since this crisis began, Frank felt a glimmer of hope for a peaceful resolution. He turned to Dr. Zara, who was still deep in discussion with the Tellarite scientists. "Doctor," he called, "I think our work here is just beginning. Are you ready for the next phase?" Dr. Zara's eye stalks curved in that now familiar smile. "Always, Frank. The pursuit of knowledge knows no boundaries, not even between species." As they made their way to the shuttle that would take them to Admiral Johnson's flagship, Frank couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. The galaxy was about to change, and he was standing at the forefront of that change. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them, armed with the power of diplomacy and the promise of scientific cooperation. Frank stood at the viewport of Admiral Johnson's flagship, gazing at the stars. The immediate crisis had been averted, but he knew the real work was just beginning. His comm unit chimed, displaying a message from Ambassador Elena Rossi. "Diplomat Cook, your presence is requested in Conference Room A. We have much to discuss regarding the future of human-Tellarite relations." As Frank made his way to the meeting, he reflected on the whirlwind of events that had led to this moment. The ship's corridors bustled with activity, human and Tellarite crew members working side by side in a tentative alliance. He entered the conference room to find Ambassador Rossi deep in conversation with Dr. Zara and a team of human and Tellarite scientists. The atmosphere was electric with excitement and possibility. "Ah, Frank," Ambassador Rossi greeted him warmly. "We've been reviewing the preliminary results of Dr. Zara's genetic compatibility research. The potential implications are staggering." Dr. Zara's eye stalks curved in that now familiar expression of enthusiasm. "Frank, our initial findings suggest a level of genetic compatibility between humans and Tellarites that goes beyond anything we'd hoped for. With further research, we may be able to develop a method to safely combine our DNA without resorting to cloning or forced hybridization." Frank's mind raced with the implications. "This could be the solution to the Tellarite genetic crisis," he said, his voice filled with cautious optimism. Ambassador Rossi nodded. "Exactly, which is why I'm organizing a joint human-Tellarite scientific conference to present these findings. We need to bring our best minds together to explore this potential breakthrough." Over the next few weeks, Frank found himself caught up in a whirlwind of preparation. The conference was to be held on a neutral space station, attracting researchers, politicians, and media from both species. As the day approached, Frank and Dr. Zara were chosen to lead the presentation, showcasing their research and its potential to solve the Tellarite genetic crisis. The space station hummed with activity as delegates from Earth and the Tellarite homeworld arrived. Frank stood at the podium, surveying the diverse crowd before him. He caught sight of Dr. Zara in the front row, her eye stalks curved in encouragement. "Ladies, gentlemen, and esteemed Tellarite guests," Frank began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "We stand at the threshold of a new era in interspecies cooperation." As Frank delved into the details of their research, he noticed a commotion at the back of the hall. A group of humans unfurled banners bearing slogans like "Keep Humanity Pure" and "No to Alien DNA." Leading the group was a tall, silver-haired man Frank recognized from Earth politics, Senator Marcus Holt. Frank faltered for a moment, but quickly regained his composure. He'd expected opposition, but not such a public display. As he continued his presentation, he noticed a group of Tellarites also looking uneasy, clustered around an elderly figure he later learned was Elder Vox, a staunch traditionalist. The question and answer session that followed was heated. Senator Holt stood up, his voice ringing out across the hall. "Diplomat Cook, how can you assure us that this so-called collaboration won't lead to the dilution of human genetic purity?" Before Frank could respond, Elder Vox interjected, his translator struggling to keep up with his rapid speech. "And what of Tellarite traditions? Are we to abandon millennia of cloning practices for these primitive reproduction methods? Frank took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. Senator Holt, Elder Vox, I understand your concerns. Change can be frightening, especially when it involves something as fundamental as our genetic makeup. But I urge you to consider the potential benefits. This research offers hope not just for the Tellarite people, but for both our species. Genetic diversity is strength, not weakness. As the debate raged on, Frank felt a presence at his side. Dr. Zara had joined him at the podium, her tentacles moving in soothing patterns as she addressed the crowd. My fellow Tellarites, I stand before you not as a betrayer of our values, but as someone dedicated to ensuring our survival. We must evolve or face extinction. The conference continued for days, with passionate arguments on both sides. Frank found himself constantly in the spotlight, fielding questions from reporters and engaging in heated debates with opponents of the research. One evening, as Frank was preparing for yet another interview, his comm unit chimed with an urgent message from Admiral Johnson. Diplomat Cook, we've received intelligence that remnants of Commander Grix's faction are regrouping. They're planning to sabotage the conference and steal the research data. I'm sending Commander Chen and a security team your way. Stay alert. Frank's stomach churned with anxiety. He glanced across the room at Dr. Zara, deep in discussion with a group of scientists. Their eyes met, and he saw his own concern mirrored in her eye stalks. As if the situation wasn't complicated enough, Frank began to notice the way people looked at him and Dr. Zara when they were together. Whispers and knowing glances followed them through the station's corridors. Ambassador Rossi pulled him aside after a particularly grueling debate session. Frank, she said, her voice low and serious, I need you to be careful. There are rumors circulating about you and Dr. Zara. Any hint of impropriety could jeopardize everything we're working towards. Frank felt a flush creep up his neck. Ambassador, I assure you. She held up a hand to stop him. I'm not accusing you of anything. Just be aware of the optics. We're walking a very fine line here. As Frank mulled over the ambassador's words, a new face appeared in the crowd of conference attendees. Dr. Maxwell Reed, a human geneticist known for his brilliant but controversial work, approached Frank and Dr. Zara after one of their presentations. Fascinating work, Dr. Reed said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. I believe I may be able to help you accelerate your research. My techniques are cutting edge, shall we say? Frank exchanged a glance with Dr. Zara. The offer was tempting, but something in Dr. Reed's demeanor set off warning bells in Frank's mind. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted in the main conference hall. Elder Vox stood on a chair, his eye stalks swiveling wildly as he pointed an accusatory tentacle at Dr. Zara. Traitor, he bellowed, his translator struggling to convey the venom in his voice. You would have us abandon our ways, our very identity. The crowd fell silent, all eyes turning to Dr. Zara. Frank held his breath, wondering how she would respond to this public accusation. To his amazement, Dr. Zara straightened her posture, her eye stalks steady as she addressed the stunned audience. If believing in the survival of our species makes me a traitor, then so be it, she declared, her voice firm. I volunteer to be the first Tellarite to attempt natural reproduction with a human. Leaders must be willing to take risks for the greater good. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Frank felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. He stared at Dr. Zara, his mind turning with the implications of her announcement. As the conference hall erupted into chaos, Frank's comm unit buzzed. It was a message from Senator Holt. Diplomat Cook, I challenge you to a public debate. It's time to let the people decide the future of human-Tellarite relations. Frank looked up from his comm, meeting Dr. Zara's gaze across the tumultuous room. In that moment, he knew that the next few days would determine not only the future of their research, but also the course of interstellar diplomacy, and perhaps his own personal future as well. With a deep breath, Frank straightened his shoulders and prepared to face the storm ahead. The debate with Senator Holt loomed large in his mind, as did the ethical quandaries posed by Dr. Reed's offer and the security threat from Grix's followers. But as he watched Dr. Zara calmly addressing the crowd, Frank felt a surge of persistence. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them head-on. Frank took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the packed auditorium. The debate with Senator Marcus Holt was about to begin, and the air crackled with tension. Humans and Tellarites alike filled the seats, their gazes fixed on the two figures standing at opposing podiums. "Ladies, gentlemen, and esteemed Tellarite guests," the moderator's voice rang out. "Welcome to this historic debate on human-Tellarite genetic collaboration." As Frank stepped up to deliver his opening statement, he caught sight of Dr. Zara in the front row. Her eye stalks curved in encouragement, steadying his nerves. "We stand at a crossroads," Frank began, his voice clear and measured. "The path before us offers not just a solution to the Tellarite genetic crisis, but an opportunity for both our species to grow stronger together." Over the next 2 hours, Frank and Senator Holt engaged in a heated exchange of ideas. Holt's arguments appealed to emotion, invoking fears of genetic corruption and loss of human identity. "We cannot risk diluting the very essence of what makes us human," Holt declared, his silver hair gleaming under the harsh lights. Frank countered with logic and historical precedent. "Throughout human history, our greatest strengths have come from our ability to adapt and diversify," he argued. "The mixing of different human populations has led to increased genetic resilience and cultural richness. This collaboration with the Tellarites is the next step in our evolution as a species." As the debate progressed, Frank noticed a shift in the audience. The initial skepticism began to give way to curiosity and cautious optimism. Even some of Holt's supporters seemed swayed by Frank's well-researched responses. Meanwhile, in a research lab several levels below the debate hall, Dr. Zara and Dr. Maxwell Reed huddled over a holographic display of DNA strands. "Fascinating," Dr. Reed murmured, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "If we apply this modified CRISPR technique to the Tellarite genome, we could stabilize the hybrid DNA within weeks instead of months." Dr. Zara's eye stalks twitched uneasily. "Dr. Reed, while I appreciate your expertise, I'm concerned about the ethical implications of such rapid genetic modification. We need to ensure the safety and consent of all participants." Reed waved a hand dismissively. "Ethics can be such a hindrance to progress, my dear. Think of the lives we could save with this breakthrough." As Dr. Zara opened her mouth to protest, an alarm blared through the research facility. Red lights flashed, and a computerized voice announced a security breach. Several levels up, Commander Sarah Chen led her team through the dimly lit corridors of the space station's maintenance section. Her hand rested on her weapon as she signaled her team to move forward. "Intel suggests the extremists have set up a base in this area," Chen whispered into her comm unit. "Stay alert." As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a group of armed Tellarites. Chaos erupted as both sides took cover, energy weapons firing in quick succession. "Hold your fire," Chen shouted, recognizing the need to minimize casualties. She spotted an opportunity and signaled her team. In a coordinated maneuver, they outflanked the Tellarite extremists, forcing most of them to surrender. As Chen secured the last of the captives, she noticed one Tellarite slipping away through a maintenance hatch. "Freck," she muttered, recognizing the former associate of Commander Grix. Despite her team's efforts, Vrek managed to escape into the labyrinth of the station's infrastructure. Back in the debate hall, Frank was delivering his closing statement. "The challenges we face are not human challenges or Tellarite challenges, but shared challenges. By combining our strengths, we can overcome them together." As the audience erupted in applause, Frank felt a wave of relief wash over him. He'd done it. Public opinion was shifting in favor of collaboration. Ambassador Elena Rossi wasted no time capitalizing on this momentum. As soon as the debate concluded, she approached Frank with a broad smile. "Excellent work, Diplomat Cook. I'm proposing a formal treaty between Earth and the Tellarite homeworld. We need to strike while the iron is hot." Frank nodded, his mind already racing with the implications. But before he could respond, his comm unit buzzed urgently. It was a security alert. There had been a breach in the research facility. His heart pounding, Frank raced towards the labs, images of Dr. Zara in danger flashing through his mind. As he entered the facility, he found chaos. Alarms blared, and researchers scrambled to secure their data. "Dr. Zara!" Frank called out, scanning the room frantically. He spotted her near a bank of computers, facing off against a Tellarite Frank recognized as Rek. The extremist leader held a data drive in one hand and a weapon in the other. "Step away from the console, traitor," Rek snarled at Dr. Zara, his translator struggling to convey the venom in his voice. Frank inched closer, trying to find an angle to disarm Rek without endangering Dr. Zara or the vital research data. "Vrek," Frank said calmly, drawing the Tellarite's attention. "It's over. Your team has been captured. Let's talk about this." Vrek's eye stalks swiveled wildly between Frank and Dr. Zara. "Talk? While you plot to destroy our genetic purity? Never!" In that moment of distraction, Dr. Zara made her move. With lightning speed, one of her tentacles shot out, knocking the weapon from Rek's grasp. Frank lunged forward, tackling the Tellarite to the ground. As security personnel flooded into the lab to apprehend Rek, Frank helped Dr. Zara to her feet. Their eyes met, and a moment of unspoken connection passed between them. But the moment was shattered as Dr. Reed emerged from a side lab, clutching a datapad. "Excellent timing," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "I've just achieved a breakthrough in stabilizing the hybrid DNA. With my methods, we could have viable human Tellarite embryos within weeks." Frank and Dr. Zara exchanged a troubled look. The ethical implications of Reed's work were concerning, to say the least. Before they could address this new development, Frank's comm unit chimed. It was Ambassador Rossi. "Frank, we have a situation. Elder Vox is calling for a complete halt to the project. He's demanding a Tellarite referendum on the entire collaboration." Frank's mind raced. They were so close to achieving real progress, but now everything hung in the balance. He looked at Dr. Zara, then back at the datapad in Dr. Reed's hands. They had some difficult decisions to make, and time was running out. As if sensing his thoughts, Dr. Zara placed a tentacle on Frank's arm. "Whatever we decide," she said softly, "we'll face it together." Frank nodded, squaring his shoulders. The real challenges were just beginning, but for the first time since this all started, he felt truly hopeful about the future of human-Tellarite relations. With Dr. Zara by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. Frank's comm unit buzzed again, this time with an urgent message from Admiral Johnson. "Diplomat Cook, we're initiating preparations for your public demonstration with Dr. Zara. Report to Medical Bay 3 immediately." Frank exchanged a glance with Dr. Zara, her eye stalks curving in a mix of anticipation and apprehension. As they made their way through the crowded corridors of the space station, Frank couldn't help but notice the increased security presence. Human and Tellarite guards patrolled in pairs, their weapons at the ready. Upon entering Medical Bay 3, they were greeted by a team of doctors, both human and Tellarite. Dr. Eliza Chen, the lead human physician, approached them with a datapad in hand. "We'll be conducting a series of comprehensive tests to document your genetic compatibility," she explained. "This data will be crucial for the public demonstration." Over the next several hours, Frank and Dr. Zara underwent a battery of examinations. Blood samples were drawn, genetic markers analyzed, and physiological responses monitored. Frank winced as a Tellarite doctor extracted a small tissue sample from his arm, the procedure more painful than he'd anticipated. "You okay?" Dr. Zara asked, her voice infused with concern. Frank nodded, managing a smile. Just didn't expect it to sting quite so much. As the day wore on, Frank found himself growing increasingly aware of Dr. Zara's presence. The shared experience of undergoing these intimate examinations created a bond between them that transcended their professional relationship. He caught himself studying the delicate patterns on her tentacles, the way her eye stalks moved with such grace and purpose. Dr. Chen's voice broke through his reverie. "Remarkable," she said, examining a holographic display of their combined genetic profiles. "The potential compatibility is even higher than we initially predicted." As word of their progress spread, curious onlookers began to gather outside the medical bay. Frank could hear the murmur of voices, some excited, others skeptical. The pressure of what they were attempting began to weigh heavily on him. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the station. Frank's comm unit crackled to life with Commander Chen's voice. "Security alert in the lower levels. All non-essential personnel are to remain in their quarters." Through the windows of the medical bay, Frank could see people running in the corridors, panic evident on their faces. He turned to Dr. Zara, whose eye stalks were swiveling rapidly, taking in the chaos. "What's happening?" she asked, her translator struggling to convey the anxiety in her voice. Before Frank could respond, his comm unit buzzed again. This time it was Ambassador Rossi, her face grim. "Frank, we have a situation. Senator Holt has released a video claiming your research is a cover for a sterilization plot against the Tellarites. It's spreading like wildfire." Frank's blood ran cold. He could already hear shouts of anger from the crowd outside the medical bay. The security guards at the door shifted nervously, hands on their weapons. "This is Admiral Johnson," a new voice boomed over the station-wide comm system. "I am ordering an immediate lockdown of all sections. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." As the lockdown protocols engaged, Frank and Dr. Zara found themselves trapped in the medical bay with the research team. Outside, they could hear the crowd growing larger and more hostile. "Traitors!" someone shouted, the word clear even through the thick doors. "Human scum!" cried another voice, this one distinctly Tellarite. Dr. Chen approached Frank and Dr. Zara, her face pale. "We need to secure the research data," she said urgently. "If the extremists get their hands on it—" Frank nodded, understanding the implications. He turned to Dr. Zara, seeing the same grit in her eyes. "We need to do something," he said. "We can't let Holt's lies destroy everything we've worked for." Dr. Zara's eye stalks curved in agreement. "But what can we do? We're trapped in here, and even if we weren't, who would believe us over a senator?" Frank's mind raced, considering their options. The sound of something heavy impacting the door made them all jump. The crowd outside was getting more aggressive. Suddenly, an idea struck him. It was risky, potentially dangerous, but it might be their only chance to save the Alliance and their work. "Dr. Zara," he said, his voice low and intense, "I think we need to move up our timeline. We need to attempt the hybrid conception. Now." Dr. Zara's eye stalks went rigid with shock. "Now? But we haven't completed all the preliminary tests. The risks are less than the risk of losing everything," Frank finished. "If we broadcast the attempt live, show everyone the truth of what we're doing, it might be enough to counter Holt's lies." Dr. Chen interjected, "It's incredibly risky. We haven't prepared for this. The medical implications alone—" "We don't have a choice," Frank insisted. He turned back to Dr. Zara, taking one of her tentacles in his hand. "I know it's asking a lot, but I believe in our work, in what we're trying to achieve, and I believe in you." Dr. Zara was silent for a long moment, her eye stalks swiveling as she considered. Finally, she gave the Tellarite equivalent of a nod. "Let's do it." As the medical team scrambled to prepare for the unprecedented procedure, Frank contacted Ambassador Rossi. "Ambassador, we need to set up a live broadcast, immediately." "A broadcast? Frank, what are you planning?" Rossi's voice was thick with concern. "We're going to show everyone the truth," Frank replied, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "Prepare the channels. We're making history today." As Dr. Chen and her team readied the equipment, Frank and Dr. Zara exchanged a long look. In that moment, Frank realized that regardless of the outcome, his life would never be the same after this day. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. Outside, the sound of energy weapons discharging echoed through the corridors. Commander Chen's voice came over the comm again. "Hostiles subdued in Section 5, proceeding to secure the medical bay." Frank nodded to Dr. Zara. "Are you ready?" Her eye stalks curved in a gesture he had come to recognize as a smile. "As ready as I'll ever be, Frank." As they took their positions for the broadcast, Frank silently prayed that this gamble would pay off. The future of two species hung in the balance, and he was about to put everything on the line. "Line." Frank took a deep breath, his hand hovering over the broadcast controls. He glanced at Dr. Zara, her eye stalks curved in silent support. With a nod, he pressed the button, and the red light on the camera blinked to life. "Citizens of Earth and Teller Prime," Frank began, his voice steady despite the chaos outside. "We come to you today with a message of hope and unity." Dr. Zara's tentacle intertwined with Frank's fingers as she spoke. "What you are about to witness is not a threat, but a solution, a path forward for both our species." As they explained the procedure, Frank could hear the muffled sounds of Commander Chen's team outside, establishing a protective perimeter around the medical bay. The constant hum of energy weapons and shouted orders formed a tense backdrop to their broadcast. Suddenly, the station shuddered, lights flickering ominously. Frank's comm unit crackled to life with Admiral Johnson's voice. "We've detected jamming attempts from Senator Holt's allies, moving the flagship into position to boost your signal." Frank nodded, pressing on with rekindled commitment. "Despite attempts to silence us, we will show you the truth." As they began the delicate process of combining their genetic material, alarms blared throughout the station. Commander Chen's voice cut through the noise. "Vrek has escaped. He's heading for the power core." Frank's heart raced, but he forced himself to focus on the task at hand. Dr. Zara's tentacles moved with precision, manipulating the complex equipment with a grace that belied the tension in the air. "We're seeing the first signs of successful hybridization," Dr. Chen announced, her eyes wide with excitement as she studied the microscope feed. The image was broadcast to billions of viewers across 2 worlds. Frank could almost feel the collective intake of breath as humans and Tellarites alike witnessed the impossible becoming reality before their eyes. A violent tremor rocked the station. "Vrek's initiated an overload sequence." Commander Chen's voice was tight with urgency. "I'm going in, maintaining a defensive position around you two." Frank's hands shook slightly as he continued the procedure, hyper-aware of the ticking clock. Dr. Zara's eye stalks swiveled to meet his gaze, a silent exchange of strength passing between them. Minutes stretched like hours as they worked, the stations creaking and groaning around them. Frank strained his ears for any news from Commander Chen, but the comm remained ominously silent. Just as they were completing the final steps, a deafening roar shook the medical bay. The lights died, plunging them into darkness for a heart-stopping moment before emergency power kicked in. "Overload sequence halted," Commander Chen's breathless voice came through. "Vrek is subdued. You're clear to finish." With a shared look of relief, Frank and Dr. Zara turned back to their work. Under the watchful eye of the camera, they made the final adjustments. "There," Dr. Chen whispered, her voice filled with awe. On the monitor, visible to all, the first human Tellarite hybrid embryo pulsed with life, its cells dividing rapidly. A hush fell over the medical bay, the silence spreading across the station and beyond. Frank could almost feel the weight of billions of eyes watching, judging, processing. Then, like a wave gathering strength, a cheer erupted. It started in the corridors outside the medical bay, growing louder as it spread through the station. Frank's comm unit exploded with incoming messages from Earth and Teller Prime, a cacophony of excitement and support. Ambassador Rossi's face appeared on a nearby screen, her expression a mix of relief and triumph. "You've done it, Frank. The treaty is being finalized as we speak. We're entering a new era of cooperation." As the implications of their success sank in, Frank felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. He turned to Dr. Zara, seeing his own fatigue mirrored in the droop of her eye stalks. "We did it," he said simply, unable to find words adequate for the moment. Dr. Zara's tentacle squeezed his hand. "Together," she replied, her translator conveying a depth of emotion that transcended species. As the adrenaline of the moment began to fade, Frank became aware of the flurry of activity around them. Medical staff were securing the precious embryo, security teams were escorting the last of the protesters away, and diplomats were already clamoring for statements and interviews. Ambassador Rossi approached, her tablet in hand. "I hate to rush you, but we need to capitalize on this momentum. We've got a joint session of the UN and Tellarite High Council scheduled for 3 weeks from now. They want you both to present your findings." Frank nodded, his mind already racing with the implications. He glanced at Dr. Zara, seeing the same mix of excitement and apprehension in her eye stalks that he felt. As they began to discuss the details with Rossi, Frank's comm unit chimed with an incoming message. It was from Admiral Johnson, marked urgent. "Diplomat Cook, Dr. Zara," the Admiral's gruff voice came through. "Outstanding work today, but we're not out of the woods yet. Senator Holt and Elder Vox are already rallying their supporters, claiming the broadcast was faked. We need to move fast to counter their narrative." Frank's teeth gritted. Even in the face of irrefutable evidence, the extremists weren't giving up. He looked at Dr. Zara, then at the secured container holding their groundbreaking creation. "We're ready, Admiral," Frank replied, his voice firm. "Whatever it takes to secure this alliance and protect our work." As they left the medical bay, flanked by security, Frank couldn't help but feel that their journey was not nearly finished. The creation of the hybrid embryo was just the beginning. Now came the real challenge, changing hearts and minds across two worlds. With Dr. Zara by his side, Frank stepped into the corridor, ready to face whatever came next in their quest for interstellar unity.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.